Well, that was a bit of an abrupt ending to that. Oh, well. Welcome to our 10th episode of Mac and JT. Jacob, how was your weekend?
Oh, my weekend was great. My weekend was great. Casey, how was yours?
It was good. It was good. It involved a solid Bengals win, so I can't complain about that. Was actually down at the Banks, got to do a video board sort of event down there and kind of enjoy the atmosphere of the Sunday night football game, and that was enjoyable. I enjoyed that, and yeah, it was a good time. It was a good weekend.
Cincinnati looked absolutely incredible on Sunday night. I don't know if anyone in the chat right now was at the game. Casey, I don't know if you were, but I mean that stadium looked absolutely incredible.
Oh yeah, I mean the stripes before we dive deep into our show to start the stripes. I've never seen anything like that. Like we got the white out. We've got other like stadiums that do special things, but having the actual stadium striped with the fans, that was something I just never seen before. Never thought that would be possible, and it looked good. It looked really good. It was very cool to see. I'd love to see something where they do that, but with the whiteout, where it's white and black stripes. That'd be really cool. Can't wait for that. That's gotta come down the line, right?
Has to, I'm sure. They're doing a great job over there in the front offices of the Bengals, getting the fans involved and everything like that at the big games. I'd certainly expect a white tiger whiteout. That'd be really cool.
Yeah, it'd be very cool. Let's jump right into our week 9, even though it says week 8. That's my bad. Our week 9 NFL recap and news. Jacob, we want to start with one guy, CJ Stroud. My goodness, he just cooked this last weekend. What are your thoughts on CJ Stroud over this weekend?
There was no other way to start the episode tonight. Look, I know we talk about CJ a lot just because we're Ohio State fans, but it's beyond that at this point. This kid, just 9 weeks into his NFL career, has maybe cemented himself in the conversation, at least, of a top 10 quarterback in the league. This last weekend against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he threw for 470 yards. That's a rookie record to go along with 5 touchdowns, another rookie record. Something that hasn't been talked about a whole lot following those two gaudy numbers is he also completed almost 72% of his passes. The accuracy and the abilities he's had to read the defense so early in his young career has just been unbelievable. And Casey, I was wondering, has there ever been a 1 versus 2 quarterback debate that's over this quickly? Just 9 weeks into the season, CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. I'm not mailing it in on Bryce Young yet. Certainly just early in his young career. He can certainly turn it around and be a special player, but CJ just looks to have that edge, have something special that you look for in that top tier of guys.
Yeah, and it's a little unfortunate for Bryce Young. I think his future is less bright just in terms of what's around him and what's coming in the near future. Whereas the Texans, they got a healthy cap space. They still got plenty of draft capital ahead of them. They've got players that are blossoming. Some of their draft picks, like Nico Collins and Tank Dell, all those guys, like they've got a pretty good roster as it is right now. It is a little strange that CJ Stroud lost to Bryce Young, like not even 2 weeks ago. And, we were like, oh, it's still up for debate. No, after this game, I feel like there's no debate, in all honesty. It is closed. That chapter is closed. CJ Stroud should have been the number 1 pick in the NFL. 100%. I don't
I
care
absolutely
about.
agree.
I
There's
don't.
one thing I do want to point out about CJ's play so far this year. He's obviously putting up the numbers that are getting him a lot of recognition. But Houston's DVOA rushing is 31st in the league, and that's the adjusted rating based on the defense you're playing. It puts everyone at an even field based on their matchup. 31st in rushing DVOA, third in passing. That's the biggest split of any NFL team in the league right now. And the ability of CJ Stroud to really move the ball efficiently through the air with almost no support from his run game is something that we haven't seen from any quarterback in the league, much less a rookie, in quite some time.
Yeah, and I know we're not going to talk about the Texans today. Probably going to save that for off the bench later. But Dameon Pierce could change that, and he's been hurt. He's been in and out of the lineup, so we might not have even seen the full potential of what this Texas offense looks like when everyone's healthy and clicking. But moving on to the fraudulent Dolphins. And I put fraudulent Dolphins. I'm not ready to mail that in just yet. I am getting ready to drop it into the mailbox, though. I'm that close to just saying that this team isn't going to do anything crazy in the postseason. I mean, they ended up coming back against the Chiefs. What was the final score? 14-21, something like that. Had a really good second half, but couldn't quite get it done. I don't know. A lot of people are saying they're fraudulent because they just haven't beaten a legit team yet. Jacob, what are your thoughts on the Dolphins?
I was very quick to jump to the fraudulent claim as well with the Dolphins after their loss in Germany on Sunday morning. But I don't know that I'm quite there yet. Look, I don't think the Dolphins have shown what we all wanted to see from them when they were rolling 4-0 to start the year. They've flustered against the Bills, the Eagles, and then now the Chiefs, the three contenders that they've really played this year. But look, this Chiefs game was in Germany. The travel schedule, we know, with international games is always very weird. And they're a fluke, Tyreek Hill fumble, lateral, playground touchdown by the Chiefs defense away from being in a tie game there. 14 points is not something I expect to be a standard for the Dolphins. I think the Dolphins are still a very good team. I think they're a contender in the AFC. I think that game might go differently if it is in the United States. I don't know that obviously for sure. But I think this Dolphins team is going to be very, very tough to knock out down the stretch. They play a very easy stretch of games here the next couple weeks. Their next real test against the Cowboys 5 weeks out. I think this team's going to be sitting pretty going into the playoffs, pretty well rested, hopefully healthy. I think they're going to be fine and probably make some noise in the playoffs.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. And on top of that, they didn't have A-Chain still. They didn't have Armstead, I don't believe. They were missing some key pieces. And the fact that it came down that close, yeah, I'll give them a little more of a break. I'll see what they do against the Cowboys, and also not to mention Eagles Chiefs, probably top 5 teams in the NFL, top 3 you can even argue. So I'll give them a pass. I know that's not what we want, but we'll see how they play against the Dallas Cowboys. I think that's a better opponent to stack up against. Moving on to the AFC North, they just keep winning, and it makes it very difficult for us Bengals fans because we're still stuck at the bottom at 5-3. Jacob, as it stands right now, the AFC North would all get in the playoffs. Ravens winning the division, Pittsburgh at number 5, Browns at 6, and then Bengals at 7 in terms of seeding. Is this the best division in football? It has to be, right?
I think it certainly is, and I think the AFC North has been the best division in football for my whole life, the last 20 years, far and away, in my opinion. And then this year, it's very clear. Look, the NFC West is the usual competitor, and this year that's just not the case. The Seahawks have been dominated by the last 2 AFC North teams they've played. I know the Bengals swept the NFC West, so I think that whole divisional debate is all but open and shut. The AFC North definitely takes that cake. And the Bengals are going to have an uphill battle to climb out of the basement there. All those other teams just keep winning. And Baltimore looks like the real deal. Baltimore looks like a real contender. A lot of people were worried going into these last 3 weeks, that Baltimore hadn't played anyone. Well, they beat the brakes off the Lions and then turn around and destroy a team in the Seahawks that a lot of people thought were pretty good. So I'm really worried about the Ravens. The Ravens are a really, really good team, and they seem to be just getting better every week. I know we're going to get into them a little later. But, I think the Steelers' offense will eventually come back to bite them. They just can't keep winning games while being outgained by hundreds of yards. It's not possible. Somehow they keep finding a way, but that just can't be sustainable. They're going to find their way down to that 4th place spot if I had to guess right now.
Yeah, part of me also agrees with you. I think they can still go like 9-8 and miss out on the playoffs. I think AFC is pretty stacked. There's going to be another team that ends up with a better record than them, but they'll still manage to have that above 500 record that they've been having for the last 20 or so years. But yeah, that's the best division in football, hands down. Another team in the division that's talked about a lot, the NFC East, the Cowboys, They just can't win a meaningful game, and they lose to the Eagles once again. A lot of people watched that game, saw the what could have been touchdown. Guy's knee was down before he crossed the plane. What are your thoughts on the game itself?
After I've watched this game, I was left with way more questions than answered. I thought I was pretty confident in how I felt about the Cowboys, that they couldn't hang with the top teams in the league, and I thought the Eagles were going to steamroll them, and that just wasn't the case. The Cowboys hung around the entirety of the game on Sunday, even up until the very last minute when CeeDee Lamb catches the ball on the 2-yard line on the last play of the game. So I have a lot of questions about the Eagles. It seemed like the Cowboys were finding open receivers basically any time they wanted to. The Eagles secondary seems to be a real big problem, and they just keep getting banged up. James Bradbury and Darius Slay coming out for periods of time in that game. I'm worried about the Eagles, and I know the Cowboys lost, but I feel much better about the Cowboys now than I did going into Sunday. I thought they were going to get boat raced by yet another competitor, and they didn't. They stuck around. Dak played one of the best games he's played in a long time that I can remember, and he looked like a winning quarterback. And I know he stepped out on the 2-yard line on a 2-point conversion, but that's a heat of the moment play. Everyone's going to kill him for it. That's a tough play to make, to change your course, lower your shoulder, and go into the end zone. Obviously, that's something you want to see from your franchise quarterback. But I love what I saw from Dak Prescott on Sunday, and I think it might have been a big step for him in that offense.
I don't disagree with you. It just seems like they are always they're always giving someone of a pass, and I'm just tired of it. I feel like this would be a great game to give them a pass because of how close it was. And on top of that, when you're talking about the rules and whether or not that was a touchdown or not, that final play, I know some people are questioning whether that should be a touchdown or not. I think it was to Shoemaker or something like that, right at the goal line. You got to complete a catch all the way to the ground, things like that, where, why are we downing him when his knee touches the ground when he's got to complete the catch all the way to the ground anyways, things like that, to where clearly if you go by one rule, it's a touchdown. You go by the other rule, not a touchdown. So a little bit of a gray area there. It was a good game regardless of that, and I think you're right. Cowboys, they proved that they can hang with some of the better teams in the NFL, like the Eagles. And then I think finally our last update, our last intro bit here. Notable players are returning from injury.
Yes, they are, Casey. We have Justin Jefferson and James Conner, two prolific fantasy players, of course. Justin Jefferson, obviously a little bit more relevant in the actual NFL, but they're both opening their practice windows this week. So the 21-day practice window for both of those guys to return from IR started today. And then Kyler Murray also starting this week, his first game in over a calendar year. If anyone was wondering, yes, Call of Duty does come out tomorrow. So if you're worried about taking the Cardinals on Sunday, I am too. Deebo Samuel also practiced for the first time today since being out 2 weeks ago. He missed the Bengals game, obviously. They had their bye week last week. Seems like he should be good to go this Sunday and ready to play for the Niners.
Yeah, and I know I didn't put it on here, but did you see, I'm asking the chat because we talked about this before the show. Did you see the injury report for the Houston Texans? I mean, it had literally more than like 20 people on that list. It was insane.
It was unbelievable.
I've
never seen anything like it.
There's probably like 10 people that did not practice. There was like 8 that were limited, and then there was like 3 that were questionable or whatever the terminology is. It was kind of insane. A little bit of a edge there for the Bengals. They're, I guess, a little healthier. We have some bigger injuries with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Sam Hubbard, but hey, you take what you can get when a half of the team that you're going up against is hurt in some way. Yeah, you should take that as a victory or
some big names on that list for the Texans as well. So definitely something to keep an eye on as we get going into Sunday for Bengals fans.
Absolutely. And let's start our first game, Browns versus Ravens. I think the line I have here, Baltimore. Oh, oops. I don't know if that's your actual team pick or not, but Baltimore -6. The over-under was 38.5. And I think this is going to be a really good game, Jacob. I think this is two top five defenses in the league. I think the Ravens, they really love to run the ball. And with the way the Browns are playing right now, they might not be able to do that. It's going to be, can Lamar beat them over the top? Well, guess what? The Browns have a really good secondary as well. Then you go look at the X factors, I think, in that game, which is the Browns' offense. What can they do to move the ball and to make it competitive? Deshaun Watson had a decent game against the Cardinals, got a little lucky on a touchdown throw. They were able to move the ball on them. They dominated the Cardinals, which is good to see. You should be able to dominate bad teams if you're a good team. Jacob, what are your initial thoughts on this game?
My first thoughts when I saw the Browns and Ravens playing this week was, who should I root for? I looked at the standings for the Bengals and I said, who should I root for? But honestly, it doesn't matter. I think it doesn't matter how this game shakes out because these two teams are both ahead of us. I think looking at it that way is in the back burner for Bengals fans. This is going to be a great game. It's strength on strength. It's man football. This is a Big Ten football game. These guys just kind of line up and hit each other for 60 minutes and try to run it down each other's throat. And I'm really excited for it. I think it's going to be a great game. You said the over-unders in the high 30s. I mean, that's just wonderful. That's AFC North football right there.
Absolutely.
I'm really excited for this one. The one thing that still worries me about the Browns offense is the inability to find a consistent run game ever since Nick Chubb's injury. We knew they weren't going to be able to replace Nick Chubb. That's an impossible task. But Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt, we thought could probably match those numbers combined, at least come close, make the offense look somewhat similar. That just hasn't been the case. Jerome Ford played well this last week, probably his best game since that 100-yard night when Chubb did go down. Kareem Hunt starting to take a lot more carries into that offense. Do you think that duo can come into the expectations that we had for them when Chubb went down, or do you think this is going to be a battle that the Browns are going to be fighting for the rest of the year?
I think against certain teams that are specifically weak against the run, I'm sorry. When they're a little weak against the run, I think they'll be fine with that duo. But as we've seen against Seattle and against some of these other teams, like the Cardinals, who are pretty good against the run, I mean, the Browns are committed to running the ball 40 times a game, and they're averaging maybe 3.5 yards a carry. And it's just like, yeah, that's, if you run it 4 times in a row, that's going to get you a first down, but it's not sustainable for what they want to try to do. I think they really got to find something else to help alleviate the run. They got to get guys out of the box, stop stacking the box against the Browns. And the only way they're going to be able to do that is if Deshaun Watson is able to start throwing the ball down the field, if he can find the wide open targets, get Amari Cooper involved. Strangely enough, they got rid of Donovan Peoples-Jones. We haven't talked about the Browns since that move happened. But now we're looking at who? David Njoku and Elijah Moore. Those are your guys that you're throwing to as your number twos. I don't think that's going to cut it going forward. What are your thoughts on that receiving group?
I would tend to agree. I was absolutely shocked when they went out and moved Donovan Peoples-Jones at the trade deadline. They went out and got Elijah Moore this offseason because they had so much worry in just having those two receivers, Amari Cooper and DPJ, with Deshaun Watson. So they went out and got a third guy. And then we're sitting here 9 weeks into the season and they're back down to 2 and a tight end. Look, I don't like the way this Browns offense is heading. Deshaun Watson has been able to tear up bad defenses. He's shown flashes of that old MVP caliber self against bad defenses like the Arizona Cardinals. But I don't think that's going to be the case this week. You know, the Ravens defense is a very, very solid unit. I think Deshaun's going to struggle, and I think that comes down to the lack of number 2 receiver. Amari Cooper showed last week that he still has it as an elite weapon in the NFL, and he dominated that game, and he kept them in it, and he eventually ended up scoring that touchdown there at the beginning. They need someone to step up, whether it's Elijah Moore, whether it's David Njoku. If that run game is not going to be getting you 1,800 yards a year like Nick Chubb, you're going to need a number 2 weapon to really step up and take some of the pressure off the rest of the offense.
Yeah, I don't know what that eventually looks like. I don't know if they're maybe hoping for Cedric Tillman to take a step forward. I think he was a 3rd-round pick in their draft, just this last draft. I don't know if it's just relying more on Elijah Moore. They traded for him. He's been involved in this offense, but he hasn't really been a solid number two. He's more like a number three, and same with Njoku. But you're right. Someone's got to step up if they want to keep going. And part of it, too, is quarterback play. Quarterback play's got to be better as well. I mean, they've been rolling out there with PJ Walker and DTR, and that's just not going to cut it long term. Deshaun's got to be out there, and he's got to play, better than he has. But yeah, I think part of the reason for their woes is that receiving group is not up to snuff. Now, we talked about most of the Browns offense. I did want to bring up one thing before we moved on from the Browns, and that's Dawand Jones. And people that know me and know off the bench, know the show, know that I was a big Dawand Jones guy. He's been solid, but he's not been all pro. So take that as you may. There's your update on Dawand Jones for all that actually cared about that. And I mentioned before, moving on to their defense, the Browns defense, they were on pace a couple weeks ago being, record breaking. I don't know if they're still on that pace. They're still probably top 5 defense in the NFL at the current moment. You look at their player for player, and I just don't know, arguably for me, in my opinion, they have one of the, if not the best secondary in the league. And if you look at their defensive line, Myles Garrett, Za'Darius Smith, Dalvin Tomlinson, that group of 3 guys, that puts them in the top 5, probably top 3 if you're really valuing Myles Garrett. They just have a really good core of guys. You just know that this game is going to be, like you said, Big Ten, smash mouth, AFC North. That's going to be a grinder. And in all honesty, when you look at the Ravens, when it comes to a game like that, they've struggled. They've kind of struggled. You look at the Steelers game, they lost 10-17. And you look at their other loss this season against the Colts, that was another grinder, 22-19. I don't know. Maybe the Browns. If Deshaun plays, I think they have a really good chance. I think they have a really good chance to make it a ball game. -6, in my opinion, is a little high. But I'm going to stick with the Ravens. I don't know if you are as well, but the Ravens, until they're proven to have slowed down, when they're not blowing teams out by 30-something points, I just can't bet against them.
Yeah, I mean, this Browns defense has been great this year. It's unequivocally the best unit in the league so far this season. They have studs at all 3 levels. Guys like Myles Garrett, like you said, probably the midseason defensive player of the year if you had to poll experts across the league. The signings of Za'Darius Smith and Dalvin Tomlinson have not been talked about quite enough, in my opinion, with the season Myles Garrett's been having on that one edge. Those 2 free agent additions have freed him up so much. Those are not elite, but that next maybe tier or tier below that, 3rd tier guys, truly powerful edge rushers. And Dalvin Tomlinson in the middle, it's something that's given Myles Garrett the ability to be double teamed and triple teamed way less than past years in his career. I think this Browns defense is going to give the Ravens problems. Like you said, the Ravens struggle in those tough, grinded out football games, which is not the case for normal Ravens teams. That's not Ravens football that we've come to know. We talked about that 38-point over-under being AFC North football. And for the Ravens, that doesn't seem like the brand of football they want to play. They've scored 30 points in 3 straight games. That offense is really tearing it up. Todd Monken seems to be finding his groove there. Lamar really getting comfortable with those new weapons. I know you said you're picking the Ravens. I think I am leaning the Browns, giving me 6 whole points there just because of the nature of the game I'm expecting here. But I think this Ravens offense is going to have the ability to maybe expose this Browns defense in a way that we haven't seen yet because, boy, they are really going right now.
Yeah, and I know we didn't talk deep into the Ravens mainly because we think they're really dominant, but you have written down here, I don't want to pass this up, because if the emergence of Keaton Mitchell, if he can continue to have this sort of success with this offense, I mean, they had almost not 200 yards. They had almost 300 yards rushing against the Seattle Seahawks. They just went out and got Leonard Williams, by the way. Like, it's not like they didn't try to answer some of their issues in the middle of their defense, which had been pretty much solved up until this last week. This was such a shock for me. I thought they had kind of figured out their issues with the run game, but turns out when you play Lamar Jackson and you play a guy that could be an emerging star in KEATON Mitchell, rushing 9 times for 138 yards and a touchdown sounds a lot like Devon A-Chain type numbers.
Very similar player.
Very...
KEATON Mitchell, a second-team All-American at ECU before his rookie year this year. He's been on IR for most of the start of the season. The Ravens absolutely loved him in preseason and training camp. I think the carry share, the split we saw last week, is going to be what you come to expect in Baltimore. Gus Edwards having those 5 carry, 10-yard, 2-touchdown kind of days, where KEATON Mitchell's getting the bulk of those outside carries. I think that's kind of the backfield dynamic that we can expect the rest of the year in Baltimore. Speaking of that backfield, they would love a second running back like KEATON Mitchell to really cement himself, because Lamar is still carrying the ball 10 times a game. And I sit here every week and I say he needs to stop. But if the offense is going to look like this and he's not really taking that many hard hits, I guess it's not a problem. So I think 9 weeks into the season, however many years into Lamar's career, I'm going to finally say I think it's fine if the Ravens just run him however much they want to run him.
So he's carried the ball 84 times. Obviously, not every carry you can justify a tackle or a major hit. Sometimes he's running out of bounds, but that's 84 chances that he's had to be hit, let alone 21 sacks. And I don't even know what the pressures are, the quarterback hits. They got to stop running him 10 times. I know he's doing well. It's a part of their offense. But if they can just like reduce it for the remainder of the season and then ramp it back up in the playoffs, like I don't know. I don't want to see Lamar go down. I want to fight the Ravens. I want to play the Ravens, excuse me, not fight them. I want to play the Ravens at full strength. I think every team in the AFC North wants to play them at full strength just to prove that they can beat them without or with Lamar. But again, it's just it's a lot of hits throughout the season. Their defense, we didn't talk much about them, but I will point out what you have written down here because you did a lot of research on their pass rush. It's pretty good too, dude. I mean, it's a bunch of like B+ tier players. Maybe Maduke, I don't even know how to pronounce that last name. Madubuike. Maybe he's kind of coming out that he's becoming a star, but the rest of the guys are kind of like B-list sort of players, your average to above average players, and they're still balling out.
They picked up Kyle Van Noy and Jadeveon Clowney off the street. Granted, Jadeveon Clowney was during training camp, Kyle Van Noy in week 3 of the season. They have a combined 8.5 sacks. Van Noy 5 in his 6 games with the Ravens. Clowney 3.5 so far this season. That's just unbelievable production from basically free players. You're paying these guys veteran minimum, minuscule contracts, and that gives you the ability to really, experiment on some other things around the offense. And we saw that with them, or around the team, and we saw that with them going out and getting Roquan Smith, which is just such a Ravens player. And now he's been there for just over a year, and he loves it. You heard him coming out today saying he's glad his career is not going to waste anymore, taking a shot at the Chicago Bears organization. But look, the Ravens have done nothing but win and be a great defensive team since he got there. He's changed what that defense was trending in the wrong direction. He certainly changed the narrative about that side of the ball there, and he's revived Patrick Queen's career. Before the trade for Roquan Smith, many Ravens fans and Ravens executives alike were talking about not picking up Patrick Queen's 5th-year option. He had been more or less a very underwhelming young player through the first 3 years in the league. But Roquan Smith comes in, takes that lead role, that quarterback of the defense role, lets Patrick Queen kind of fall back into that linebacker 2, if you will. And he's found a role that he absolutely loves. He's 3rd on the team in tackles. He has 3.5 sacks to go with that as well. Just insane production out of guys on that defense, like you said, you don't expect these numbers out of. You have a rookie out of Penn State from last year's draft class, Odafe Owe, who hasn't done a whole lot in his career, but in the last 2 weeks, he has a sack in both of those games. The production they're getting up and down that roster is unbelievable. The ability they have to rotate guys in and out and keep legs fresh is unbelievable. That defense is really, really good in Baltimore, Casey.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the season that they were also on some sort of pace to break some records. Maybe they don't have the yards figured out, but they definitely got the points given up, and that's what matters. Yards don't equal points. So, great Lou Anarumo said something like that. Yeah, and we already did our picks. You have the Browns. I'll write that down somewhere. But I don't want to flash it up on screen again because I'm lazy. So we're going to move on to the next big game of the week. I think there's really two big games, and that was the Browns versus the Ravens and this game. 49ers versus the Jaguars. San Francisco is favored by 3 points. 45.5 is the total. Jacob, the last time we saw the 49ers was against the Bengals, and they got torched. They got cut up. They were a little banged up. They were without Debo. They were without Trent Williams. I'm not sure if they were without some of their defensive players, but I do remember those two off the top of my head. They struggled quite a bit. And when they were down in the fourth quarter, Purdy just imploded. He did not look like the guy that I had come to kind of expect. And we've started to see a pattern now with Purdy. And it's not a good one. It's not good at all. When he's trailing in the fourth quarter, he's been really, really bad, really miserable. The last 3 weeks, not in the fourth quarter, but just in general, he's 55 of 88, 762 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. His passer rating drops more than 30 points when the Niners are trailing in a ball game in the fourth quarter. That's not good. That is horrible.
Yeah, that's the opposite of it. Whatever it is that we talk about with quarterbacks, that is the opposite of it right there. Brock Purdy seems like he's the perfect quarterback for the team with 4 all-pro weapons, an elite O-line, and elite defense that's up every game by 10 points. I think if you get outside of that comfortable area for him, he's going to really struggle. He was one of the best quarterbacks in college football his sophomore year at Iowa State, and then his junior year and senior year, he fell off the face of the earth, and he ended up going at the last pick in the draft. Brock Purdy is who Brock Purdy is. I think it was a little bit foolish for all of us, me included. I said it in whatever that was, week 4, week 5, that Brock Purdy's a top 5 quarterback in the league. I got swept up in the whole narrative and the inability to lose a game to start his career, but I think he's come back down to earth now, and we saw it when those guys were out. He can't do this at a really high level without elite weapons. And I don't know that that's necessarily the worst thing to say about a guy. I'm not taking a shot at Brock Purdy. Most quarterbacks in the league can't do this without elite weapons. There's a very select few that can. I just think Brock Purdy was starting to work him way into that, top tier discussion of quarterbacks. And in the last couple of weeks, he's certainly pulled himself back to the pack.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that. I started putting him in that top 10 discussion, that echelon where you're thinking maybe he does somewhat elevate this team. No, that's just not the case. He needs all of his starters to be out there in order to perform at a high level. And maybe we haven't even really seen, if he does have all of his starters, what it looks like when he is trailing still. It could just be a pressure sort of thing where the pressure gets to him. And yes, he won a couple playoff games, but I don't know, man. It's a little worrisome. He didn't play great in his playoff games either. I forgot to mention that. So we'll have to keep an eye on this, see if it continues to be an issue for him. Part of me wants to think that when everyone's back and healthy again, that it isn't an issue. But
I fully expect when their weapons come back and that offense is healthy for Brock Purdy to snap his fingers and look just like the quarterback we talked about at the beginning of the season, throw for 370 yards and 4 touchdowns and just absolutely destroy one of the top teams in the league. That's what we're going to see happen, and everyone's going to turn around again and be back on the Brock Purdy train. And I think they can absolutely win a Super Bowl with Brock Purdy. That's not what I'm saying. Their weapons are that good. I just think when, the Niners are sitting there at 14-3, 13-4, whatever that crazy record's going to be at the end of the year, we just need to remember week 9, week 10, week 8, when Brock Purdy really struggled without these elite weapons, and just remember who he is, because when he gets the chance to show you again, he'll prove it again. But with these elite weapons, he's going to continue to be an elite quarterback.
Right. I agree. And, part of the reason why they've gone on this 3-game losing streak, this skid, has to do with the turnovers. So I'm going to get into some of their defensive notes here that we have. The first 5 games of the season, they had a +7 turnover margin. And even then, they weren't creating a whole lot of turnovers on defense. They were just keeping Brock clean. They weren't fumbling the ball a whole lot. He wasn't throwing interceptions. The last 3 games, they have 7 giveaways or -3 in turnover differential. I think that's honestly the difference of this team right now, is that they just coughed up the ball a lot. And it's crazy to think that, because, you look at the Bengals game, there was 2 or 3 interceptions in that game. I can't remember off the top of my head, but there was a lot of turnovers in that game. Brock Purdy threw for over 365 yards, and there was like 70 of that was garbage time yards at the end of the ball game. But I mean, they were still able to operate on offense at a decent level, at an above average level. I think part of it has to be that the defense was not able to create turnovers. And part of the reason that they're not able to create turnovers the last 3 games that they've played is that they haven't been getting pressure home. Now, I know that the Vikings game, they didn't even have a sack. And I was surprised with that one. The Bengals, I think they only gave up 3 sacks that game, but it was not really that big of a factor, in my opinion. It wasn't crushing. Like, the pressure wasn't getting home every other play. It was, very, very minimal pressure, so to speak. I know Burrow was probably getting the ball out pretty quickly. I don't have those numbers right in front of me, but those are all very important for this team to function the way that it's supposed to. They need to get lots of pressure with a defensive line that they've sunk millions and millions of dollars into, with all-stars, with draft capital, and they need their offensive weapons to be healthy and perform. That's how this team functions and works. And maybe it just sounds stupid that every team's like that, but it's more so with this team than others. They need their stars to perform. If they don't, they do not have the depth. They don't have the roster construction to do things that other teams can, that are a little bit more fleshed out. Their backup linebacker is not going to be nearly as effective, of course, as Fred Warner. Their edge rushers, if Nick Bosa goes down, now they have Chase Young, but before that, they didn't have another guy. There's just a bunch of no names that were, I would put the B tier list. They're not even at that. They're at the C, probably D tier, guys that are barely on the practice squad. So that was what I noticed about the last 3 games for these 49ers. Is there anything that you want to add before I get into the Jaguars?
Yeah, just really quick, this Niners defense, front to back, is supposed to be one of the best units in the entire league. Look, we know guys on all 3 levels. You said Nick Bosa, Chase Young, obviously a new addition, Fred Warner at the linebacker position, Jimmy Ward, Za'darius Ward at the DB position. There's big names everywhere, and they're just not performing up to the level that we've come to expect in San Francisco, or that we saw in the beginning of the season that this group's capable of. Sean Connor points out a point in the chat that I definitely wanted to bring up. Steve Wilkes is going to be moving down from the booth to the sideline this week to call their defensive plays. He was relaying it to the linebackers coach who was dumping it into Fred Warner. He's now going to be on the sidelines. We saw that made a huge difference for the Pittsburgh Steelers offense when Matt Canada went from the booth to the sideline so he could talk directly with Kenny Pickett. I would expect a very similar change or a very similar result coming from that change for the Niners defense. I think anytime you get to spend more time right there with your coach, talking through what you saw on the field, what's going on, the nuances of the game, it's so much easier to do that sideline face to face than walking over, picking up the phone, calling up to the press box, going through someone else to pass it around. Like, that's such an unbelievable extra step for these guys to take in the middle of an NFL fight, in the middle of a battle. And now they can just walk off the sideline and talk to their defensive coordinator. I think that's going to be a huge boost for this team, and it's definitely going to help this unit go back to the way that we know they can play.
Absolutely. I didn't even know that they made that change. That's a very important change. And I know I mentioned Chase Young. It's going to be his first game. I mean, I beginning of the season called the defensive line the most stacked I've ever seen. And now it's unbelievably stacked. That's going to be really fun to watch them go up against the Jaguars, who just recently traded for Ezra Cleveland, I believe, left guard. So that's going to be a really fun matchup to watch. The Jaguars, though, Jacob, I don't know if you see it in the title of the 49ers versus Jags in our little document here that we share. They're just the worst. They're not the worst. They are a worse version of the Bengals, literally from top to bottom, except for maybe Travis Etienne and then Evan Ingram. But you can make the comparison to our wideouts that Evan Ingram could be T. Higgins, or that Christian Kirk can be, I don't know, Tyler Boyd or Jamar Chase, however you want to look at whatever the number one receiver is there, because that's still kind of unknown at this point. The Jaguars are just a little bit worse version than the Bengals. And they've got plenty of weapons. They got Travis Etienne. They got Calvin Ridley, who's not performed the way that they thought he would. They thought that he would be a number one, but it turns out Christian Kirk can fill in the number one role when his number is called upon. Evan Ingram. They've got a solid offensive line. They just upgraded that position with Ezra Cleveland. And most importantly, they have Trevor Lawrence. And I think all that together, I really like, if the 49ers have not snapped out of it, if they've not learned to be able to rush the passer again, which is just crazy, I'm even saying that. If they have not learned to create the pressure to create turnovers, then this Jaguars offense is going to have a field day against this team. It just is. They have too many weapons to go up against, too much to cover. But then you think about their defense too. See, I really like the Jags this week. I'm just going to spoil it for everyone. I really, really like the Jags. And I can't believe I'm saying it, because I can't believe the 49ers could possibly lose 4 games in a row. But the Jaguars defense, they're tied the league for the most turnovers, 18. They've created a ton of turnovers, which is not a good thing for this 49ers or just team in general, who's currently struggling really bad in the turnover differential market. They've not given up more than 24 points all season. That was a shocker. They've played not at full strength yet this season. They've had injuries to their secondary, to their linebackers, to some of their defensive linemen, in and out some games. But for the most part, this will be the first week, I think, that they are all together. And the thing that was very troublesome for this Jaguars team last year, the secondary, is really good. Darius Williams is a phenomenal slot corner. Andre Sisco, he's playing great at safety right now. Tyson Campbell, he's been a great number one corner as of this year. Josh Allen having a career year rushing the passer. Still waiting for Travion Walker to have that breakout, but they're able to get pressure home. They have a guy that is just dominating right now. I really like this Jags matchup versus the 49ers this week, Jacob. I really do.
Halfway into the year, I think it's really important to give a round of applause to the teams that are living up to the high expectations. And the Jags are certainly one of them. They've won 5 games in a row now. Colin Cowherd said in the preseason that the Jags were his number 1 seed pick in the AFC, and everyone called him crazy. Well, now they're sitting right there with a shot at it at the top of the conference, playing some really good football. See a lot of Trevor Lawrence love in the chat. I absolutely hated him when he was at Clemson. I hated him in college coming into the league, but there's nothing you can do now. He's turned into a very, very good NFL quarterback. He's been the golden child since he was in high school, and he's lived up to it every step of the way, and he continues to do so in the NFL. He's super talented. You touched on the weapons they have on offense, the guys they have on that defense. This Jags team is headed straight in the right direction. I think they're a contender this year. I think they're going to be a contender for years to come. And I think the Niners are the first huge test for them in this new window of Jags football. I think if they can take this 5-game win streak, play the San Francisco 49ers, who obviously are stumbling a bit right now, lost 3 in a row going into the bye week, but they're still that top of the league brand. Most of the power rankings still have the Niners in the top, 5 to 7, maybe 8 points there in the top of the league. So if the Jags can turn around and keep this hot streak going, take on the 49ers and beat them on Sunday, then they're the real deal. They've really arrived if they haven't already. I don't know if I'm there yet, Casey. I don't know if I'm there yet.
I know. I feel the same way because, like I said, they're a worse version than the Bengals. Literally from top to bottom, you can go Joe Burrow to Trevor Lawrence. You probably want Joe Burrow over Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence hasn't been able to really sling the ball quite like Joe Burrow has the last couple of weeks. Travis Etienne, I'll give you the pass on that. Joe Mixon, Travis Etienne. It depends on what type of player you want there. But you're probably going Travis Etienne due to age. Wideouts, literally 1-for-1. Jamar Chase, I'll give Christian Kirk because right now he's the number 1 receiver. You want Jamar Chase. T. Higgins, Calvin Ridley. You probably want T. Higgins. Evan Ingram, Tyler Boyd, you can make an argument for either one. Probably going with Evan Ingram, but that's because he's a tight end. Okay, moving on. Offensive line for the Bengals. Jaguars offensive line. I probably would have picked the Bengals offensive line last week. I don't know what that looks like for the Jags with Ezra Cleveland. I'm still going to go with the Bengals offensive line, though. I think it's a little bit more capable of being a power sort of offensive line. They could do both things very effectively. You go to the defense. I'd rather have Trey Hendrickson right now over Josh Allen, despite Josh Allen having a career season right now. Trey Hendrickson has a better just pass rush win rate, one of the top ones in the league right now. You look at DJ Reader, I mean, he's going to beat all those guys inside for the Jaguars. Sam Hubbard, Travion Walker, very similar right now player-wise. And I think I'd rather have Sam Hubbard. He's more of a veteran presence there. BJ Hill, I think, compares well to the Jaguars, but I think I'd rather have BJ Hill. Look at the linebackers, which they have great linebackers. I didn't even touch on that. They've got, what is that? It's a very hard name to pronounce for the Jaguars.
Boyasata Aluakon?
Yeah, Aluakon. He's been doing great. But the combination of Logan Wilson and Pratt, I think I'd rather have those guys over their star, Aluakon. And then you might get me on the secondary. But I think that's where my hesitation comes from, is because I see what elite talent looks like. They don't have like this elite game breaker, right? None of their team is like that. They just have guys all around that are above average. And you might say Trevor Lawrence is a game breaker, but over the last couple of weeks, he's been dwindling down on that efficiency stats. He's not throwing a whole lot of yards. They're struggling in the red zone. He's not throwing a lot of touchdowns. They're not scoring a lot of points, but that helps when you have a defense that's not giving up a lot of points. Regardless, though, Jacob, I still, when we get down to picking these games, I think I'm going to be picking the Jaguars. I think, like I said, if the 49ers have not figured this out, if they are still struggling at the start of this game, I think the Jaguars got this. -3, I like that a lot. I still think that, regardless, I think the Jaguars can win this game, is what I'm getting at. I like the Jaguars +3. That's what I'm trying to say. I like the Jaguars +3. I think they can win the ball game. They're a worse version than the Bengals, but they're still really talented.
I love your reasoning for the Jags pick, and I think I agree with you on almost all your points. but I'm going to take the Niners -3. I just don't know that this Jags team is ready to take that next step. Like we talked about with the Dolphins, it's one thing to dominate the teams you're supposed to beat, and the Jags have been doing that. That's awesome. It's another thing to take a step up into that next level and play the real competitors and win. I just don't know that the Jags are there yet. If they go, I guess they're at home. But if the Niners come into Jacksonville and the Jags are able to get the job done this week, I think I'll fully come around on the Jaguars as being a full legitimate AFC contender. I just need to see it against one of those top tier teams. Maybe it's this week. Maybe you're right. I'm just going to lean with the 49ers. Coming off the bye, especially, they're a little bit too well coached of a team, I think, to lose 4 in a row with a bye in between.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough. And if Travion Walker were to just like all of a sudden break out, which probably unlikely at this current moment, I mean, they would be an elite defense. I mean, they're already pretty good, but just want to add that little cherry on top. Like, there's still some hope at the end of the tunnel that they can just all of a sudden be like a top 5 defense if Travion Walker just ends up being who they think that he's supposed to be. But anyways, moving on to our next game. Oop, I almost revealed our team picks there, even though we haven't picked them. Jets versus Raiders. This is Sunday Night Football. We like to cover the primetime games. It's a bit of a stinker, but there's actually a lot to talk about here than meets the eye, because the Raiders just fired their head coach, Josh McDaniels. Don't know if you have it written down here. I can't remember the coach's name, but
Antonio Pierce.
Antonio Pierce, and they win their first game with him. It's a good start.
Yeah, and the Jets on primetime, you know what that means. A handful of Aaron Rodgers warm-up throws will be all over our timeline. So that's always a beautiful thing to see when the Jets are playing in primetime. Aaron Rodgers out there bootless, crutchless, slinging that thing 60 yards, 60 days after tearing his Achilles. Just an unbelievable thing to see every week that the Jets seem to be playing in primetime every week now. Casey, before we dive into this game, I just want to ask you real quick, do you think Aaron Rodgers is going to play again this year?
Oh, gosh, dude. It would be insane if he did. I mean, it would be quite ludicrous. It would be shattering every single record probably in the NFL in terms of recovery of a Achilles tear. And I believe it was like a full tear, right? It's not just like a small tear. It was a full-on tear. He says he's going to. That's the thing. He keeps saying he's going to. What, December 20-something, something like that? So I got to say yes. If he's saying he's going to, I got to trust in that, right?
I was in the absolutely not, no way he comes back camp for roughly 8 weeks. But these last 2 weeks, when Aaron Rodgers is doing full 3-step drops and slinging that thing 55 yards in warmups, I think he's coming back. And I think he might be coming back sooner than later, honestly, at this point, especially if the Jets can stay afloat. And that's what we're going to talk about right here. Can the Jets stay afloat? They absolutely have to win this game against the Raiders. I think for Aaron Rodgers coming back to stay within the cards, dropping below 500 8 weeks into the season is just not something that you can afford to do in such a tight AFC wildcard race. And this Jets offense is giving them no help, Casey. Zach Wilson has been absolutely horrible since he took the reins just 4 snaps into week 1. He's shown blips here and there. They asked Robert Saleh today about starting Zach Wilson and why he continues to do so. The head coach's response, you got me on that one. So it seems that in the facility, they don't know why they're starting Zach Wilson either. That's not a vote of confidence that makes me feel good about this Jets team moving forward in the time still to come without Aaron Rodgers. I do think there's a chance that they make a quarterback change here. I know the trade deadline is passed, and obviously it's not super easy to go out and get another quarterback to come take over at this point in the season. But look, there's guys out there, free agents. We saw Carson Wentz just signed with the Rams a couple days ago. I think the Jets might, even after sticking with Zach Wilson for all this time, still might move on and find a new quarterback because he's just been horrible.
Yeah, and I tried to do some research on Tim Boyle, because he's also sitting behind on the depth chart as their number 2 guy at the current moment. Career stats: 66 of 106, 62% completion percentage. That's not bad. 574 yards. It's probably not great on 66 completions. 5.4 yards average. 3 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Not good. It's not much better than Zach Wilson, which, I don't know if you watched off the bench. I think that was Tuesday. So just yesterday. I got into it with Trace about what was wrong with the Jets. Is it Zach Wilson or is it the entire offense? And in all honesty, I think it's the entire offense. At that moment, just this last week, I think it was the entire offense. Now, if they're all the way healthy on the offensive line, maybe it's a different ball game. Maybe it's a different scenario. But they're not. And they didn't play great when they were all healthy anyways. I mean, when you're getting sacked 8 times in a game, it's very hard to play quarterback. And when you're trying to hold on to the ball, wait for your open receiver, and they're not getting open, your only guy that's getting open is Garrett Wilson, that's not a good look either. So as much as I want to see Rodgers return, I don't know if it's necessarily good for him to return. I really don't know, because I don't think their offensive line's figured out. Clearly not. I don't think that they have a great scheme to get guys open except for Garrett Wilson. And then they can run the ball occasionally with Breece Hall, but I feel like they stack the box on him and they eliminate that. So then it just becomes the Garrett Wilson, Zach Wilson connection. And it's just not, Zach Wilson isn't accurate enough for that, for you to be constantly feeding Garrett Wilson. So the Jets offense is putrid. I don't know.
I agree across the board. And you did it perfectly there, laying out the 2 exciting players on the offense. Breece Hall breaks out a 25-yard run, it seems, about once a week. Garrett Wilson will end the game with 90 yards and 7 catches, but can't quite find his way into the end zone, and the Jets will lose 10-3. This offense just cannot score. They can't move the ball. Those 2 young players, Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson, are so exciting and so talented. You just can't get the ball to them. You have a quarterback who can't throw, who can't go through his progressions. You have a running back who's so electric that every time he comes into the game, the defense just loads the box right away because they're not scared of your passing attack whatsoever. You have the worst O-line in the league to start this season. I think for a guy coming off an Achilles injury, standing behind that O-line might not be in his best interest for sure. You laid out the points perfectly, though. I don't know how different this looks with Rodgers. There's injuries on other parts of the offense. The O-line wouldn't just miraculously be better. I do think Aaron Rodgers would make that wide receiver room sustainable. Guys like Randall Cobb and Allen Lazard have only ever known playing with Aaron Rodgers, and taking a drop-off of Rodgers to Zach Wilson is pretty steep. And not to mention that Aaron Rodgers basically built this roster in the offseason for him, for his play style, for his Nathaniel Hackett offense. Now that plan has gone in the gutter, I think a lot of the things that they planned on doing this season have gone with it. So I don't know if it's completely fair to judge the preseason expectations of the Jets based on what we've seen now from the offense without Aaron Rodgers, but I think a lot of the problems are bigger than just the quarterback position for sure.
Yeah, but the reason why they're in games to begin with, which we're going to talk about right now, their defense. And you have it written here. Great unit. Top 10 across the board. Probably would be Super Bowl caliber if they had a functional offense. They're just asked to do so much, though, all the time. And they, most of the time, come through, in all honesty. What are your thoughts on this defense when it comes against the Raiders offense?
I think it's perfect. I think it's just an absolutely perfect matchup. I think the Jets are built for this Raiders offense. But to be fair, I think most defenses are probably built to play this Raiders offense. The Raiders really only have 2 things going for them this year, and it's Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers. Josh Jacobs has not been able to get going at all. And what are the best 2 pieces of this Jets defense? Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. They've been an absolutely incredible corner tandem, second year in a row. A lot of people worried last year. DJ Reed playing much above the previous stats that he put out in his career. Sauce Gardner, obviously a rookie last season, and they led the league as a cornerback duo. Well, they're doing it again. That was not a fluke. They're an absolutely dominant duo, and the rest of that defense is really stepping up. Quinnen Williams gets a massive contract this offseason to lock him down as the interior of that defensive line for years to come, and he's delivering, playing at a very high level in the interior of that defense. Bryce Huff, their edge rusher, has the highest pass rush win percentage in the entire league over the last 3 seasons since he entered the league. Just an unbelievable stat from a guy that you've never even heard of in all likelihood. And then Quinnen Williams' brother, Quincy Williams, their middle linebacker, also got an extension this offseason, and he's even playing better than he has at any point in his career. This defense lifts each other up. They're all playing really, really well right now. And it's a shame that the offense just can't put points on the board, because this defense deserves to win games, and this defense deserves to play playoff football.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in all honesty, I think part of the reason that they're also not considered the best defense in the league is because of just morale of the situation too. Like, I think they could be even better than what they are right now if they had Aaron Rodgers back there. I do think that makes a huge difference just in terms of team morale, terms of how players are playing, especially on offense too. Like, we just don't know. Like, I think everyone in the league knows that Zach Wilson is not the guy, that they just keep banging their head up against the wall thinking that something's going to happen with Zach Wilson when it's just not the case. And that players, when Rodgers comes back, maybe it turns around more significantly than we think. But they're going to be playing against the Raiders, who just recently went through head coaching change. They're starting to turn things around there. They played a decent game against the Patriots, who I don't know if you really want to consider that like a get-right game for them. Or not the Patriots. It wasn't the Patriots.
Giants.
The Giants. I mean, I don't know what to think of that necessarily, because I don't really think the Giants are any good either. But it's a solid win for them to get back in the win column, to just have a better team morale with the coaching staff that changed there. And, we saw a little bit of life from Josh Jacobs, and maybe Aiden O'Connell brings some of that magic that we saw in the preseason, and maybe we start seeing some more stuff from Devontae and Myers. I don't know. But against this defense, probably not going to happen. There's like a 5% chance that happens, in all honesty. The way that the Raiders even have a chance in this ball game is if they can do something against the Jets offense, which is very doable. We got Max Crosby. 3 sacks on Sunday, 9.5 on the year. That's a stud, just like you have written down here. But what else do they got? I don't know.
They have nothing. They have nothing else on the defensive side of the ball. He's the only pass rush they have. Second most on the team, 2. Max Crosby has 9.5. That's just ridiculous drop-off of production there. You can't have one guy beat you. You can't have only one guy win the game for you. That's just not a sustainable model. You need a whole team. You need 11 guys on defense. That seemed to change a little bit this last week. They had 8 sacks against the Giants O-line. Like Casey said, the Giants O-line are an absolute joke. I think that's an outlier for sure. But then you look at who they're playing this week, and it's the Jets, whose O-line might be just as bad. So if they can keep that ball rolling, get up there with 5, 6, 7, maybe even 8 sacks again, I think the Raiders will make this game super, super interesting. The offense with the Raiders is really where most of my qualms lie, because they just refuse to use their weapons. I know Josh Jacobs hasn't been overly productive this year, under 4 yards per carry, but he just had his second game of the year with over 20 carries. This was a guy last year who you wouldn't even think about it. You're giving him 25 carries a game. He led the league in rushing. He was a dominant force out of that backfield. I think we're going to see a lot more of last year's Josh Jacobs as that offense turns over to Aiden O'Connell at the quarterback position. I also think the two receivers are going to step up. The last 2 weeks, Jacoby Myers and Devontae Adams. Myers has 3 catches for 57 yards. Devontae Adams 5 for 45. That's in the last 2 weeks combined. And no receiver on the Raiders has a touchdown. That's just unbelievable lack of production from a position group that you're pouring a lot of money into with those two guys, not to mention Hunter Renfrow, who just a couple years ago we were all talking about as maybe the next up-and-coming slot receiver in the NFL, just another really special talent there on the outside, and they're not using any of them. I think that'll change with a young quarterback. You'll go to the places you feel most comfortable, and I know I'd feel a lot more comfortable throwing to Devontae Adams than anyone else. So I think those numbers are definitely going to go up as Aiden O'Connell takes over that offense.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. And one thing of note about the Raiders that I just kind of realized on the show, 2021, they had a coaching change and a whole culture change that led them to have a above 500 record. And then they go and get Josh McDaniels and they start losing again. Maybe they turn it around. Maybe they start to actually be really competitive. I don't know. This would be a good start. Giants, Jets. They win those 2 games. Maybe they really start turning things around. And I won't have to consider them putrid anymore.
If anyone can get that team to turn it around, I think it's Antonio Pierce. You saw the energy that he's had in interviews. You saw the energy he's had in the locker room. Seems like the players are excited to be there for the first time in a long time. I think Antonio Pierce is doing some special stuff out there, and Rick Bisaccia obviously took that interim job the year that the Raiders made the playoffs and came to Cincinnati, and he didn't get hired at the end of that season, even after leading them to the playoff position. If Antonio Pierce can make this team even a little bit respectable at the end of the year, I'm not suggesting that they make the playoffs, but if they can get to a respectable point where they're playing good football at the end of the year, you got to hope Mark Davis doesn't make that mistake again, and he gives Antonio Pierce a chance to stick around and be the head coach of that organization.
Of course. I am going to be picking the Jets in this game. I think their defense dominates, and I think they just continue to stay afloat. They end up being 5-4. I mean, that's probably the best case scenario that they could have ever hoped for at this point in the season, with Aaron Rodgers going down like he did. Who are you going with?
If you bet on the NFL, you know that you have to bet on interim head coaches. When an interim head coach takes over, you always bet them in that game they're going to cover at an alarming rate, and that's what I did last week. Hold on, Casey. I took the Raiders last week in his first game, and they did cover. But after that first game, interim coaches do not do very well in the NFL. I'm taking the Jets in game 2 for the Raiders interim head coach.
You got me on that one. That was a sneaky one. I
feel good about that too. The Jets absolutely have to win this game to stay in the mix. I think they're going to pull out all the stops. Robert Saleh, Joe Douglas, they know that Aaron Rodgers is not going to contemplate this if they fall too far back. So I think they're going to do everything they can to win this game and probably the next few.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Moving on to Thursday Night Football, another really just stink fest here, but it's the battle for probably the number one, or not number one seed. Is it just?
But it's not. It's the battle for the number 1 pick, but the Bears have both picks.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter what happens. Right. We shouldn't have done this game. Oh well, we did it because it's a primetime game and it's
Thursday night football.
It's Casey. Thursday night football. We have to talk about it because we're so hot on betting Thursday night football props that we just have to talk about this. Let's start with the Panthers. We touched on this at the beginning of the show. We both think that they made the wrong choice. Clearly, as of right now, the front runner for Rookie of the Year is C.J. Stroud. And it's not even close. I don't think I'm not all the way out on Young either. It's still way too early to be out on any quarterback this early on in the season, especially a number 1 or the number 1 pick in the draft. I mean, there's a reason why he was picked number 1, right? But 8 touchdowns, 7 interceptions is just not going to cut it. He doesn't have a whole lot of help. Adam Thielen has probably been the only thing that's been consistent, and then you've got some spurts of Hayden Hurst mixed in there. They can't really get a run game going. The offense right now is just struggling a lot. And then you look at their defense, and it's just not much better, man. They're just below average. Brian Burns, Derek Brown, both having down years. They can't continue to do it all by themselves. Secondary struggling. CJ Henderson not panning out. Dante Jackson, their other corner, starting corner, just getting burnt all over the place. Part of it is because they can't get pressure. Part of it's because their secondary is really, really bad. But that's why they're 1-7 on the year. Jacob, what are your thoughts on the Panthers?
For a team that has so many holes, it has to be really alarming to not have your first round pick next year. I mean, if you're a Panthers fan, you have to be sitting there in a real dark place right now, because not only did you maybe take the wrong quarterback, but you traded your potentially first overall pick the next year and an elite young weapon in DJ Moore to do so. I mean, this has a chance to go down as one of the worst trades in the history of the NFL. And if Bryce Young doesn't pan out, doesn't turn his career around just from these first 9 games, then the Panthers are going to be in a dark spot for a while. But I like a little bit of what I've seen from this team. Adam Thielen has done more than I could have ever expected in Carolina. I did not think he was going to be nearly this dominant as the number one receiver down there. You would love for them to find any kind of rushing attack. They went out and spent money on Miles Sanders this offseason, which I think we all kind of made fun of them for when it happened. And then now Chuba Hubbard has taken over the reins. He was a dominant running back in college for Oklahoma State. So maybe he can find some of that Bedlam magic in Carolina, but it didn't seem to be the case last week. I don't really think this Panthers team's going to get any better, but lucky for them, they're not playing a team who's very good either. The Bears on offense still just haven't quite found it. They played pretty well in the first 3 quarters last week, and then Tyson Bagent 2 picks in the fourth and a fumble from the running back there at the end of the game. They need Justin Fields back. I know he was ruled out again today for tomorrow night's game. They need Justin Fields back bad. I know last week or 2 weeks ago we had the little joking conversation about Tyson Bagent or Justin Fields in a quarterback controversy. Well, that ship has sailed. Bagent has proven that he could probably be a backup in this league. He's shown flashes of exciting play in the last 3 weeks as a starter, but he's definitely not a starting caliber quarterback, and they need Fields back if they're going to do anything the rest of this year. The one exciting thing about this offense last week is that they established the run. 156 rushing yards against a pretty good defense in the New Orleans Saints. I'm pretty excited for the rushing attack when Justin Fields comes back, if they're ready to open that thing up. When he was playing at the beginning of the year, that was our biggest gripe, was them not letting him run, not designing things for him to get his legs involved. And it seems like they're really starting to focus on the run game here. So I think when Justin Fields comes back, this team could look different than it did when he played at the beginning of the year. We saw him change who he was as a quarterback at about the midway point of last season. So, I mean, maybe when he comes back, this team takes a huge step. But, yeah, this game on Thursday night is just an absolute stinker, Casey.
Yeah, and you touched on it a little bit, the run game, a bright spot on this team. I think when we talked about the Bears last time, we talked about them versus the Raiders and how I said, there's the formula. That's the formula they need to continue to strive for, establishing the run game. I think when you do that, you are putting less pressure on the quarterback position, which right now it's Bagent. But when Justin Fields comes back, if you can allow that run game to kind of help support him, and then you start throwing it over the top to DJ Moore, you start throwing it over the top to Darnell Mooney, I think you've got a good offense there. I just, it's going to take a little bit to get to that point. Justin Fields has got to prove that he can hold on to the ball, and he's got to prove that he can keep a clean stat sheet. But I like where this offense can go. Right now, they have Bagent, which not great. It's going to be a stink fest this Thursday night game. But the Bears defense, too, it's got some signs. It's got some bright spots on this team. They just went out and traded for Montez Sweat. He had a sack or pretty close to a sack his first game as a Bear. So
I thought I remembered him having a sack as well, but when I checked the box score today, he didn't have a sack. So maybe the quarterback got right back to the line or something. But he played great in his first game with the Bears. I saw that number 94 big on my TV a whole bunch. I was wondering if a lot of these guys traded at the deadline would play on Sunday, just a couple days in their new organization. That seemed to be yes across the board, even the quarterback in Minnesota. But I was very, very, very impressed with Montez Sweat being able to step in and make an impact right away for the Bears. I think that was a great trade and signing. They have an absurd amount of cap space and they have a lot of draft capital. And you're not going to get a second round pick better than Montez Sweat next year. So if you have the cap space to do it, you might as well go do it. And I think when Montez Sweat really gets comfortable in that defense and is ready to let loose, we're going to see him really unleash himself in that system. We've seen edge rushers really thrive in Chicago before, and I think Montez Sweat's going to be no different. The other big story from the trade deadline, I know it was last week, but Jalen Johnson requested a trade from the Bears. Once he didn't get traded, there was a lot of worry that he was going to sit out the rest of the year and be moved in the offseason. Well, he played on Sunday, and he played really well. So having him there the rest of the season, maybe they're going to be able to work something out with him. He's a really exciting young player on that defense. You would hate to see them get rid of young guys when they're trying to build something right now.
right, and I think Jalen Johnson's a solid corner. I think that it was a smart decision by the Bears to continue to keep him around despite him requesting that trade. They are one of the few teams that have loads of cap space. I mean, I think before the Sweat contract, they had 100 million in cap space. They had lots of room to work with. They're going to continue to have lots of room to work with during the offseason. They've got plenty of draft capital. They've got two possibly top picks in the draft. Right now, I think they're sitting at 2 and 3, I believe. I think Cardinals hold the number one spot, but that would be just a great boost for them as well. I think you just got to trust the process with the Bears. I really do. I think if you just trust the process and let it ride out, that next year should be the year that they go all in with money, draft, the whole kit and caboodle. But one thing, too, I wanted to mention before we jump into our props and the picks. The Bears defense surprised. I was very shocked when I saw this, but they're the best run defense in the league. But they're one of the worst pass defenses in the league. So give and take there. Maybe if Jalen Johnson can, rally the secondary a little bit to play a little better, maybe they'll have a solid defense now with Montez Sweat being able to get pressure home.
And Sean Connor points out in the chat that it's Frank Reich versus Matt Eberflus. What an electric coaching matchup. Just the exact opposite of what we have going on in Jacksonville. Doug Peterson and Kyle Shanahan, two elite coaches there. These two, I think this might just be a battle of which coach doesn't lose the game, Casey. These two are brain fart city between these two on those sidelines. They just can't go through a whole game getting the job done. I think one of these guys is going to make a mistake, whether that's play calling, timeout usage, a bad challenge, something like that. I think one of these two quarterbacks or one of these two coaches is going to lose the game for their team. I think I'm going to take the Panthers plus the field goal and the hook. I feel like 3 points is way too much for the Shepherd University product, Tyson Bagent. I don't like taking the minus with a D2 undrafted quarterback. I'm going to go with the guy who went 1-1.
Yeah, it's going to be so hard for me to not pick the Panthers here. And I'm going to pick the Panthers. I think that, just like you said, the field goal and the hook, I think does it for me. I think it's going to be a close game because I think these two teams stink. And whoever makes the big mistake, is going to end up costing their team the win in the end. And I think that could be Eberflus. Yeah, that's all I got for my pick there. We've got props to give out for Thursday Night Football, and we've been on a roll. I mean, if I went back and counted the units that we have given out for free, I mean, we're probably
unbelievable.
We're probably up what? A good. Well, I gave out that parlay. I mean, that has to be at least. Well, when I did the parlay, it was probably 25 to win 700. So I mean, it's an absurd amount of money that you would have won.
If you're tailing Mac and JT, you're rolling in it right now. So
Yeah.
we're gonna keep the ship sailing, keep the train on the tracks for tomorrow night. My prop, I absolutely love. When I saw this line, I said, "Oh boy, I can't wait for the show tonight to tell the good people, the good listeners of Mac and JT, how they're gonna make some money tomorrow night because it's Tyson Bagent over 19.5 rushing yards." You might say, well, Jacob, you just said you didn't want to bet on the D2 undrafted quarterback. I don't want to bet on him to throw the ball, but I'll bet on him to run. Tyson Bagent last week had 8 carries, and of those 8 carries, he whacked up 70 yards. 70 yards on the ground. Of the 3 games he's started, 2 of those 3 games, he's went well over that 20-yard mark. I think 19.5 is just an absolutely foolish line by those people out in Vegas. And I'm going to win this week, and you guys are going to win too. Tyson Bagent over 19.5. It's simple.
For me, I by the way, I really love that pick. That's going to be one I definitely put some money on. I struggled a little bit trying to find something. I was a little last minute on trying to pick something I really liked, but something really stood out to me. I think the receptions for Adam Thielen are a little low. It's sitting at 6.5 right now. If you can get at 5.5, that's a lock. 6.5, I like where that's at. It's plus money at the current moment, or it's even money. I'm sorry, it's plus 100. He has hit that number, that total, 6 out of the 8 games he's played in. So I really like those chances. I like those odds, especially against the worst, one of the worst passing defenses in the league. I think it makes a whole lot of sense to rely on that, and Bryce Young's going to be relying on his number 1 target quite a bit in this game. So I'm going to take that. Adam Thielen, receptions, 6.5. Over.
Yeah, I love that one too, Casey. Adam Thielen tied for 5th in the league in receptions. I was absolutely shocked when I saw that before the show today. That's just unbelievable production out of the elder statesman down there in Carolina. I think 6.5, you're sitting pretty. And like you said, if you can find that at 5.5, maybe call the bank, take out a loan. That 5.5 is an enticing line if you can find that somewhere.
Absolutely. And that concludes Mac and JT. Jacob, thank you once again. Chat, thank you for watching. I know in the next 30 minutes we're going to be on Chatterbox. We're going to have the Reds show. So if you are big Reds fans, tune in for that because that's going to be a great episode. I think they're going to be talking about off-season potential acquisitions, things of that nature. And yeah, tune in for that. And tomorrow, obviously off the bench. Friday, I believe Tom is out of the office, so that might be some breaking news. I don't think we've gone over that just yet, but some programming notes later on Chatterbox Sports. Thank you all for tuning in and watching. Appreciate it a lot. Jacob, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
Nothing from me. Everyone, have a good rest of your week. Have a good weekend. We'll see y'all back here, Mac and JT, next Wednesday.
Yeah, I've been Mac.
And I've been JT.
And we'll see you guys next week.